It was a night that shimmered with exclusivity, a Saturday evening at Haven's Table, a restaurant that seemed to float in San Francisco's Marina district, radiating elegance. The air was a heady blend of quiet jazz, the muted murmur of lively conversation, and the delicate clink of crystal glasses. It was the kind of place where success stories were toasted with vintage wines, anniversaries celebrated over gourmet dishes, and every guest carried the weight of their status like a crown. Amid this scene of privilege sat Eleanor Gray, a woman whose very presence demanded attention. Draped in designer wear that seemed to declare her social standing without a single word, Eleanor reveled in the spotlight. Her laugh was a touch too loud, her gestures deliberate and theatrical, as though performing for an unseen audience. Seated with three equally polished friends, she effortlessly commanded the evening's narrative, her confidence filling the space like the rich scent of her signature perfume. From the crowd emerged Andre, a young waiter whose demeanor was as unassuming as his uniform was sharp. His name tag rested neatly on his chest, a small declaration of identity that he never encouraged patrons to use. In his early 20s, Andre carried himself with the precision of someone who understood that errors were not an option in his line of work. His voice was measured, smooth as silk, as he presented the specials for the evening, his gaze lowered to avoid unnecessary engagement. Eleanor's sharp tone cut through the ambience. "Why so serious, Andre? You're working in one of the city's finest restaurants. Smile a little." Her words were laced with a mock playfulness that barely concealed condescension. Andre's lips moved, shaping a smile that never touched his eyes. "Of course, ma'am. Is there anything else I can assist you with?" She leaned back, her fingers curling around the stem of her wine glass as she tilted her head, a predator sizing up her prey. "Tell me, how does someone like you end up here? This can't be your dream." Her table chuckled softly, a ripple of laughter that felt anything but kind. Andre's fingers momentarily tightened around his tray, his expression betraying nothing. "I enjoy what I do, ma'am," he replied evenly, a response that seemed to frustrate Eleanor more than silence would have. But before she could press further, Andre smoothly excused himself, disappearing into the swirl of patrons and tasks that awaited him. Yet, Eleanor couldn't seem to let him go. Her gaze followed him throughout the night as though he were an enigma she was determined to solve or dismantle. As the wine flowed and her confidence deepened, her commentary grew sharper, cutting through the room like shards of glass. Andre became her target again when he returned to their table, his movements precise as he cleared plates and refilled glasses. "Tell me, Andre," she began, her voice slicing through the lively hum of the restaurant. "Do you have any hidden talents, or are you just good at carrying trays?" Her friends chuckled, but the laughter was hollow, the discomfort unmistakable. Andre paused, his hands steady despite the storm building in the air. "I focus on doing my job well, ma'am," he replied softly. Eleanor wasn't satisfied. "Come now, don't be modest. Surely you have some talent. I hear people from your background often have musical gifts. Can you sing?" Her words hung in the air like an accusation, silencing even her friends, who exchanged uneasy glances. Andre straightened, his expression a mask. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, ma'am." "Oh, don't be shy," Eleanor persisted, her tone syrupy with mockery. "Just a little something. It's all in good fun." The room seemed to shrink as the tension thickened. Conversations faltered, and heads turned as if the entire restaurant had caught on to the unfolding drama. The jazz trio played on, their melodies now a faint backdrop to the scene unraveling before them. Andre exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the room as if weighing his options. The moment stretched, a taut string on the verge of snapping. Finally, he nodded. "If it will make you happy, ma'am," he said, his voice steady but devoid of enthusiasm. Eleanor's smile spread like a victorious banner, and the table leaned in eagerly. Around the room, other patrons stilled, their curiosity piqued. Andre stepped back, straightening his posture, the tray balanced expertly at his side. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply as if drawing strength from somewhere unseen. When he began to sing, the room itself seemed to exhale. His voice emerged soft, a low hum that carried the weight of emotion so raw it silenced the clinking of glasses and the low murmurs of conversation. Each note was a thread in a tapestry of vulnerability and strength, weaving a story that transcended the language of words. Eleanor's smirk evaporated, her glass frozen mid-swirling as she stared at him, her face etched with disbelief. The melody swelled, rich and resonant, filling the room with an energy that was almost tangible. Strangers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to astonishment. A waitress dabbed at her eyes, a couple at the bar leaned closer, and even the chef paused in the doorway, apron in hand, to witness the moment. For the first time, Eleanor was silent, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of what she was hearing. Andre's voice climbed higher, resonating with a power that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He was no longer the unassuming waiter, he was an artist commanding an audience. Eleanor, the room, and the night itself were irrevocably transformed. She didn't understand at first. There was no mocking laughter anymore, no biting remarks disguised as wit. The room had fallen into a silence so profound it carried weight, a silence that clung to the air as Andre approached the final notes of his performance. His voice wavered slightly, not from fear but from the raw emotion pouring forth, each syllable charged with meaning. That last note hung in the stillness, suspended like a fragile thread before fading into quiet. For a moment, the restaurant seemed frozen in time, its patrons collectively holding their breath. And then, like a gentle ripple building into a wave, applause began to swell. It wasn't the obligatory kind meant to fill a void. It was thunderous, heartfelt, and undeniably genuine. People rose from their seats, clapping with a fervor usually reserved for moments of shared awe. Some wiped away tears, their faces soft with admiration. Andre acknowledged the ovation with a slight nod, his expression steady, though his chest rose and fell heavily as he regained his breath. His eyes flickered to Eleanor, just for a second, before he turned and strode toward the kitchen, the tray still balanced neatly at his side. Eleanor sat motionless. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table as if anchoring herself to reality. Her face, usually so composed, betrayed something unfamiliar, a mixture of shock, unease, and a deeper emotion she couldn't name. Around her, the clapping continued, reverberating like a testament to Andre's moment. But she didn't join in. Instead, she watched him disappear through the swinging kitchen doors, her thoughts a chaotic storm. What Andre had done wasn't just a performance. It was a reckoning. It was a mirror held up to the room, and it left an impact she couldn't escape. The restaurant began to regain its rhythm, though the atmosphere remained altered. Conversations restarted but were softer, more subdued. The jazz trio hesitated, their usual tunes momentarily lost in the gravity of what had unfolded. Eleanor sat frozen, her once commanding presence noticeably diminished. Her friends avoided her gaze, their discomfort palpable. Finally, one of them spoke, their voice breaking the fragile silence. That was something else, wasn't it? Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass as she stared at the tablecloth, her confidence crumbling like a brittle facade. When she finally spoke, her voice was unsteady. I didn't expect. But the sentence died on her lips. What could she admit? That she hadn't expected Andre to be extraordinary? That she thought she could belittle him with a glance and a jest? She glanced around the room, noting the lingering buzz of admiration. A couple at a nearby table caught her eye, their disapproving expressions cutting through her like shards of glass. She felt something tighten in her chest, an unfamiliar ache, regret? Embarrassment? Maybe both. Reaching for her wine, she set it down again, the taste suddenly unappealing. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Andre leaned against the counter, his hands trembling slightly. One of the line cooks clapped him on the back with a grin. Man, you've got some pipes, they said. Andre managed a small smile, though his mind was elsewhere. He had sung all his life, in church choirs and community halls, but this felt different. He wiped his hands on a towel, steadying himself before stepping back onto the dining floor. The applause had faded by then, but the stares lingered. Some patrons offered warm smiles, others nodded with newfound respect. Andre approached Eleanor's table with cautious steps, unsure of what awaited him. She looked up, her usual sharpness absent. In its place was something softer, almost vulnerable. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice carried none of its usual edge. "For sharing that." Andre met her gaze, his expression calm but resolute. "I didn't do it for you," he replied, his tone polite yet firm. Then, with the practiced professionalism of someone who knew their worth, he added, "Let me know if you need anything else." He turned and walked away. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. She watched him move to another table, her chest tightening once more. For someone who had spent her life commanding attention, she suddenly felt very small. But though the moment had passed, its lessons remained. They lingered in a space, heavy and undeniable, pressing into Eleanor's thoughts like an unrelenting tide.